The Evil Dead remake sucks enormous gorilla dick, which is a really sad thing to say because the first 3 Evil Dead films are some of my favorite movies ever. The reason why the original Evil Dead trilogy is so great is that Sam Raimi popularized a lot of revolutionary filmmaking techniques, from the shaky cam POV shot that's used to symbolize the demonic entity's perspective, to the cheap yet incredibly effective special effects that involve a lot of creature effects, blood work, and gore. Using incredibly small and meager budgets, Sam Raimi utilized super creative and inventive filmmaking to make some of the most exciting, hilarious, and overall entertaining horror films. It's crazy that these Evil Dead movies not only exist, but are as good as they are, and the reason why I'm mentioning any of this is because all the things that helped define that original trilogy is just completely absent from this shitty Evil Dead remake. None of the charm, filmmaking talent, or just overall character that were in the trilogy is in this remake, and the end result is just this draining experience that leaves me feeling nothing but anger and frustration. Now, at the time of recording this video, I have yet to see the new Evil Dead Rise, so hopefully that movie is much better than this piece of shit. But then I realized, wait, that's literally not hard to accomplish when the 2013 film set the bar for non-Sam Raimi directed Evil Dead movies so fucking low. Everything about this Evil Dead remake is just fundamentally fucked, as I hate everything about this movie, from the way it's shot, to how the horror scenes are constructed, to the acting, to the fucking lighting of all things. Everything about this film, from both a technical and narrative perspective, is just so amateurish and incompetent, which is even more pathetic considering that this film's budget is more than 17 times the size of the budget for the original Evil Dead. To say this is anything but a massive step down from the original trilogy would be an understatement, and normally I just end this video there after making another stupid joke or something, but apparently there's a huge chunk of people on Letterboxd that actually likes this movie, and I'm apparently in the minority, so now I am forced to sit here for a while longer and justify why this stupid excuse of an Evil Dead remake just fucking stinks. Now, I was originally going to make this another long video essay where I break down my issues with the 2013 Evil Dead into 3 parts like I did with my Ghost in the Shell remake video, but I'm a busy boy and I have other shit to do, so I'm just gonna make this short and sweet. I could spend hours talking about all the incompetent technical aspects of the 2013 Evil Dead, from how ridiculously oversaturated the film looks, that at times it felt like I was watching the fucking Bye Bye Man, how laughably stupid the editing is,
something burnt here,
or how painfully obvious the attempts to recreate Sam Raimi's style are, and how it completely clashes with how Fede Álvarez, the remake's director, shot this. But you know what? In the grand scheme of things, I could forgive all of this dumb shit, all of it, if the film just didn't completely fuck up the 2 big issues I have with this movie: the story and the tone. The original Evil Dead does not have a story. The closest thing to a plot that exists in the original is that a bunch of college students drive up to the woods and hang out in a cabin, only to find out that it's a hotspot for demons, which they accidentally summon after listening to a podcast. And from then on, spooky shenanigans happens. There isn't much to the original Evil Dead from a story perspective, but at the same time, that's not really the point. You don't watch the original Evil Dead, or any of the Evil Dead films in general, for some deep narrative. You're watching it for the fun, gore, and kills. You watch it to see Bruce Campbell as Ash kill the shit out of some demonic ghouls, which is why the thing that people take away from the original isn't the narrative, but the style and filmmaking that went into making such an entertaining horror film. But in the 2013 remake, the film attempts to develop a, quote, real story with, quote, real characters that it wants you to give a shit about. And look, I have nothing against making a more serious, grounded Evil Dead movie. If anything, an idea like that would actually justify making this stupid remake at all. And on paper, the basic premise of the 2013 movie actually sounds interesting. A bunch of friends go visit a cabin in the woods because they want their friend to completely quit drugs cold turkey. There's a lot that you can work on with a premise like this, but what's just so fundamentally flawed about the, quote, story is that Álvarez literally does nothing with this concept. The premise only exists to justify having all these characters take place in the same setting, because once the actual Evil Dead horror shit commences, this film just completely drops this former drug addict trying to quit narrative as if it just never fucking happened, which then makes you wonder, why the hell did they even introduce this in the first place? Now, a common argument that I hear from people about this criticism is that, yeah, the story is kind of thin, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is this remake is just an excuse to have a huge bloody gore fest with lots of horror and violence. But I just don't find that a compelling argument, because if that's the case, then why the fuck does the movie grind to a massive halt for like 30 to 45 minutes to, quote, develop these characters? I mean, it's bad enough none of these CW-ass actors can act for shit, but the movie just gets so boring and slow that it waste time attempting to give these bland characters personality traits, like how these two characters had like some mentally ill mother or something, instead of getting to the actual horror scenes, you know, the thing that you show up for an Evil Dead movie for. Part of the charm and success of the original Evil Dead trilogy, especially Evil Dead's 1 and 2, is that they didn't waste time on pointless bullshit like this. They just start the movie and just let things play out. The first 3 Evil Dead films are all basically just a huge climax with some character moments sprinkled throughout, and that's what makes them both entertaining and quotable. But it seems like the remake just took everything that worked about the first 3 and just did the complete opposite. The 2013 Evil Dead stops the movie to force me to care about the characters, and by the time the actual supposed fun parts happen, you just don't give a fuck, because the film doesn't even do that good of a job of creating real and believable characters that you can root for. At that point, what is the difference between this 2013 Evil Dead movie and any other shitty horror remake that came out around the same time? And again, as badly executed as all these character moments are, I would be forgiving of all of it if it just had a point or purpose to it in the end. But just like the actual story premise, these character traits are just completely dropped and never brought up again. The main character's mother suffering from mental health issues is never relevant again and only exists to just pad out the runtime, which means that none of these characters in the remake are characters. They're just sentient meatbags that just exist to endure all the horror bullshit that happens in the film. And speaking of horror bullshit, I, for the life of me, just can't get invested in anything that happens in this film. You can't tell me that all this movie prioritizes is being a fun, violent gore fest when the film clearly expects me to care about the characters. And this is an issue that the original Evil Dead trilogy avoided. Now, I'm not going to pretend that Ash Williams is some multi-layered, ultra-complex Charlie Kaufman protagonist or anything, but he's considered by many to be this iconic horror movie character because 1, he was played excellently by Bruce Campbell, who made the character famous because of his oozing charisma and his commitment to going as hard as he needed to make the stunts and gore believable, and 2, he serves as a gateway into the greater Evil Dead lore, so not only do we learn as much about what's going on as Ash does, but it also gives us a reason to root for Ash, because he's this sort of underdog character. Ash has become such an iconic character that there is a literal festival called Bruce Fest that's dedicated to the man himself. Meanwhile, I can't even remember anyone's fucking name in this remake, much less root for them, and they're just so bland and forgettable that I forgot like half of them were even in the movie by the time I finished watching this stupid remake. How on earth can this film possibly expect me to get invested in any of the bloody gore and violence in the second half when I can't even figure out which character is who? How does the remake expect me to give a shit about anything that happens when it barely does anything to give me a reason to care except just insisting I should? I don't feel anything when the movie plays the stupid sad time music when this dumbass sacrifices himself to save his sister when I don't know anything about them or have any incentive to be invested in their arcs. How does the movie expect me to feel bad when this nerd gets tortured by the Deadites with the syringe and the nail gun when he's responsible for causing all of this in the first place? I mean, the guy I think is like a teacher, but then when he comes across a book that clearly states, don't open the book, don't read it, but then just proceeds to open and read it, like, what the fuck? Why does he do this? Why is everyone in this film just so dumb? Everyone in this movie is a moron, but not in a way that's endearing like the original Evil Dead. In the original, all the characters are stupid, but their stupidness doesn't cause what happens in the film. It all happens in spite of their dumbness. But in the remake, this dipshit ignoring basic reading instructions is what causes the plot for the stupid remake to even happen. Like, why? And look, I guess I kind of get the appeal of the film because this is by far one of the hardest R-rated films I think I've ever seen. The violence and gore can definitely get intense and extra bloody, so I guess I can understand people attaching themselves to that, but at that point, if you're only in it for the gore, then what is the difference between this movie and like a shitty Eli Roth film or a Saw sequel? Nothing. There's no difference whatsoever. Actually, that's a lie. There is one difference. It's that at least a Saw sequel and a terrible Eli Roth film at least know what they are. They at least are a bit self-aware about the fact that their films are stupid, which is why the tones in these movies, as bad and as terrible as they are at the very least clear. Meanwhile, the tone in this Evil Dead remake is just so messy and unclear that I just have no idea what it's even going for. Because like I said, I wouldn't have cared if this 2013 remake decided to be a more straightforward, serious horror film. That's perfectly fine. I would have liked to have seen a straightforward, serious, no-comedy Evil Dead film. And for the first like 45 minutes, that's what it feels like at first because of how painfully slow and nonchalant the film is in attempting to ground its story and make its characters somewhat likable, but then out of nowhere, the film attempts to do something like Evil Dead 2 where the Deadites start saying weird jokey shit like this.
Kiss me, you dirty cunt! Why don't you come down here so I can suck your cock, pretty boy?
it just doesn't work because one, it's just not funny anyway and just comes across more edgy than comical, but most importantly, two, it completely clashes with the tone that this remake both sets up and continues to insist that it is. The reason why the original Evil Dead trilogy works so well as both horror films and comedies is because the tones each movie establishes are so clearly wacky and over the top that it makes sense to see both extremities. For example, the reason why Evil Dead 2 can have a scene where Ash gets the shit beaten out of him by his own hand, and then directly follow it with another scene where Ash cuts off his own infected hand with a chainsaw, it's because both scenes, as tonally different as they are, blend together super well. These films can get away with having both the most hilarious camp and the most violent gore because both extremities in opposite directions fit extremely well in movies as over-the-top and goofy as the Evil Dead films. The Evil Dead films are basically Three Stooges movies, except you actually have to take the violence in a Three Stooges movie somewhat seriously, while also having that classic humor the trio are known for. But in this remake, the combination just doesn't work because the kind of film that Alvarez set out to make clashes with all those Evil Dead isms that were in the previous movies, resulting in a film that just doesn't know what it wants to be. It seems like the remake wants to be a serious, grounded horror film, but it also wants the wacky, goofy, over-the-top nature comedy bits that the other Evil Dead films had, so it just rams in these out-of-place jokes and attempts at humor, but it doesn't work because Alvarez somehow manages to half-ass both the serious and the comedic elements of this remake, resulting in a movie having an identity crisis where it doesn't even know what it wants to be. And on top of the blatantly obvious and bad attempts to recreate Sam Raimi's style, the end result is a movie that feels less like a natural continuation of the Evil Dead franchise and more like glorified Evil Dead fanfiction. So many aspects clash against each other, and because Alvarez can't juggle all these balls, I just wished he focused on one thing instead of half-assing multiple. The only thing this movie has to offer is its gore and violence, but once again, none of that matters when I don't care about anyone or anything. It's why I don't get any value out of the final fight between the main character and the Deadite, because not only does this film not earn any emotional payoff that it thinks it deserves by that point, but once again, it's this weird mishmash where you can't tell if the film is trying to be serious or goofy. It's so unclear what exact sort of response I'm supposed to get out of this moment, and while yes, I understand that it's cool, this is all surface level bullshit with no real meat hiding underneath. I wish I could enjoy the extreme violence and gore, and look, a lot of my favorite movies aside from the Evil Dead films have a lot of shocking and extreme blood work, but I just don't care in this instance. It's like when Alvarez was making this movie, he only focused on the minute surface level things that are obvious like extreme gore and violence, but not any of the actual details that make the series work as well as they do, resulting in a movie that feels more like torture porn or a trashy exploitation flick than anything of actual substance. This is such a lazy and unbelievably draining experience, and the fact that Alvarez had all these resources at his disposal, from the $17 million budget to Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell serving as producers for the movie, and this is the best he can do? This is the best you can come up with? What a waste of potential. I just hate this movie so much, and while all the more power to the people who do in fact enjoy this film, I just can't for the life of me get anything of any value or substance from this film whatsoever. If you want to see a reboot or remake or continuation or whatever of a beloved horror franchise that's actually good, just watch David Bruckner's Hellraiser. It's 100 times better than this shitty remake. Anyway, that's all I'll say for now. This movie stunk. I'm never seeing it again, and hopefully Evil Dead Rise will be much better than this bullshit. 2 out of 10. Thank you and goodbye.